I'm Florindo, and I am one of the co-chairs here at Peace Action Manhattan. We are welcoming Ray Acheson. She's from a number of different sources, including Reaching Critical Will, Women's International Fellowship, International League for Peace and Freedom, yep. And et cetera, et cetera. And she has a great background in this subject, which a lot of people don't know has come up. In October, there was a resolution by the UN to ban nuclear weapons, which is sort of a historic thing since right from its inception. That's one of the things the UN had set out to do. So this is a big deal, and we're very grateful for Ray to come and talk to us about it. Our job is going to be to organize and get the word out about the stakes at these talks, treaty negotiations. They're coming up in March and then again in June and July. So we're going to have to be ready to hit the ground and lighten up the local population about all this. Try to get some political pressure focused. But meanwhile, we'll sit back and enjoy listening to Ray's narrative about the background and what everything she has to say about this interesting topic. There will be a Q&A afterwards, after she speaks. Take it away, Ray.
Thanks very much for the invitation to come speak with you today, and I hope what I say is interesting. We'll find out during the Q&A, but it's a really exciting time for me, and I'll try and convey that. Just a little bit of background about the organization that I'm from. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom is called a league because of the time it's from. It was founded in 1915. It's actually the oldest women's peace organization in the whole world. And it has a pretty cool story. It was founded during World War I, and women from all over the world somehow managed to get in contact with each other in the middle of a war and decided to meet in The Hague in the Netherlands to protest the war and have a Congress of Women to voice an alternative to violence and the military-industrial complex before there was even a term for such a thing. So they did that, and women from countries that were at war with each other and from neutral countries came. I like to make fun of our Australian section because they were on a boat and they actually missed the Congress. They got there too late. But today we have almost 40 national sections. Most of the growth recently has been new sections in Africa and the Middle East, so that's very exciting. What I do is working out of the New York office. We have a few staff people working on international programs for WILP in addition to the national sections. And so I run the disarmament program, which is called Reaching Critical Will. The idea being that we need critical will from governments and people to achieve disarmament. It was originally started in 1999 and focused on nuclear weapons, but now we work on a whole range of disarmament and arms control issues and militarism in general. And WILP, as an organization, is a member of ICAN, and ICAN is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And so that's a global network of organizations from around the world. As of yesterday, we hit 100 countries because an organization in Iceland joined, so we're quite excited. We have about 400 groups from 100 countries. And the goal of ICAN for the last 7 years, roughly, has been to get states to negotiate a legally binding treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about. The overall goal of ICAN as a campaign and also WILP as an organization, is of course the total elimination of nuclear weapons. But we decided in the campaign to focus on this specific treaty at this time for a number of reasons. For those of you that work on nuclear weapons or follow that issue at all, you might know that it's been incredibly difficult to get the states that possess nuclear weapons to show any interest in disarmament whatsoever. And in fact, despite, you'll read in the media a few years ago about Obama and Putin reaching agreement for some bilateral reductions of their arsenals, but those were quite minimal. There's been no progress since then. The rest of the nuclear-armed states have said they're not going to get rid of their arsenals until the US and Russia bring theirs down to roughly their numbers. So it's just been stalemated. At the same time, every country that possesses nuclear weapons, which is 9 of them, by the way, I should say, it's first of all, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, which is a problem. So that's the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. And then also India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea have nuclear weapons. So these 9 countries, while they're refusing to disarm, they have actually been investing billions and billions of dollars into the modernization of their nuclear weapons systems. Obama actually committed more money than any government since Reagan's on nuclear weapons. He committed $1 trillion in the last budget. I think that's right, Alicia? Alicia knows all the figures better than I do. And they all have sort of these ongoing programs to update the systems, the weapons themselves, but also the missiles that carry them, the bombers that carry them. So it's really expansive programs. We're actually going in the opposite direction of disarmament. The 5 members of the Security Council that have nuclear weapons, they're actually legally obligated under another treaty called the Non-Proliferation Treaty to disarm. And that's been in existence since 1970, but they've refused to comply with that obligation. So every year, states gather at the UN at a meeting and talk about the need to implement this treaty. The rest of the world has signed on to all these non-proliferation measures, things they have to do to make sure that nuclear weapons don't spread to other countries. And all of that's been going fairly well, but unfortunately the disarmament aspect of the treaty hasn't been negotiated. So we're NGOs, we're looking at this situation. We can't physically walk into a nuclear-armed state and say, you have to give up your nuclear weapons. No other government can do that. They're getting really frustrated, angrier and angrier. So we started thinking about what can we do? What end run around this situation can we do to affect things, shake things up, make a bit of a scene? And a small group of countries decided that maybe a good way to go was to look at how other weapon systems have been banned. So landmines were banned in 1996 and cluster munitions were banned in 2008. And the way that that happened was a small group of countries that really were concerned with the way these weapons were killing civilians, undermining human rights. They got together and developed a prohibition treaty for these weapons, even though major users and producers like the United States and other countries didn't want this treaty to happen and didn't want to sign on. They went ahead and did it anyway. And what happened over time was US policy, the policy of other users and producers became affected by the treaty, even though they'd refused to participate in the negotiations, and then they refused to join the treaty after it had entered into force, but their behavior was still affected. And we've seen that even very recently with the US on cluster munitions, where it decided that it wouldn't export them anymore. And the last producer of cluster munitions in the United States actually decided last year to stop producing them because of Saudi Arabia using them in Yemen, and it took a lot of political flack for that, and the media started paying attention to the issue again. So we've seen the way that the normative development of expectations of behavior, what that can do to countries, even if they're not bound by the actual treaty law. And so the same countries that led the initiative on landmines and cluster munitions started looking at nuclear weapons. Why can't we do that with nuclear weapons? We're always told they're so different because only a few states have them, and of course they're the most destructive weapon in the world. But that's exactly why countries that care about human rights and international law need to do something about it. So we had a few brave countries that decided to start very tentatively with conferences, which is always the way that you start in the diplomatic scene. You hold a meeting. And so Norway hosted a meeting in Oslo in 2014. This is after, I should say, after 4 years of advocacy from civil society at the UN, and getting states to sign on to statements saying that they wanted, that they were concerned about the humanitarian effects of nuclear weapons. So I'm skipping ahead a bit, but 4 years it took of statement writing and sign-ons to gather enough momentum for Norway to feel it could hold a conference. So it did. And it was on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, and it said that it wanted to bring together experts to look at what nuclear weapons do, even a single detonation of a nuclear weapon, what it does to the environment, to human beings, to the economy, etc. The UN Security Council members with nuclear weapons boycotted it as a group. They said it was ridiculous to hold such a conference. Russia said even children know what nuclear weapons do to human beings, so why do we need to have a meeting on it? Which, of course, well, if you know what they do, why don't you get rid of them? Because they're terrible. But almost all other countries in the world went to this meeting in Oslo. Mexico held one to follow up from that. And at the Mexico meeting, they went even further by the end of it, and the Mexican government said something has to be done. We need something legal on nuclear weapons, something new. And Austria took it from there. And at the end of the Austrian conference in 2014, they put out this pledge that was under their national capacity. So it was just Austria all by itself because they didn't want to anger anybody who was at the meeting, and said that they wanted to fill the legal gap on nuclear weapons, which was, you know, usefully vague for their purposes, to allow us to articulate a narrative for what that legal gap should be after the meeting. It changed into what we now call the Humanitarian Pledge, which we got over 120 countries to sign on to ahead of this the October meeting that Florindo mentioned. And so the purpose of that was to go around the world over the next year, basically building up the expectation that a new treaty needed to be negotiated. The way that the Austrians had worded it, it wasn't explicitly a treaty banning nuclear weapons. It was this idea of filling the legal gap, which gave us a lot of space because some countries were very nervous about this idea of a treaty banning nuclear weapons. The United States and the UK had already picked up the scent of what Austria and Mexico were trying to do and were actively lobbying against it. So it was fortunate to not use that term at that time, which is how things go sometimes in diplomacy. But through that process of going around to countries, getting them to sign on to this pledge, it built up an expectation in their capitals that negotiations on a new treaty were going to happen. And then in Geneva last year, the UN hosted a series of meetings in which they were discussing what that treaty should be. And coming out of that and into the General Assembly in October, it was clear that it was going to be a treaty banning nuclear weapons. Now, what this means is, or what we expect this to mean, is a treaty that is prohibiting all aspects of nuclear weapons. So possessing them, testing them, researching and developing them, transferring them, relying on them in your security doctrines, financially investing in companies that produce them. Basically, a total prohibition of any nuclear weapon-related activity. But the key thing about it is that it's not an elimination treaty itself. So we're not expecting the nuclear armed states to come to the negotiations and agree to eliminate their arsenals. This idea is to circle around the nuclear armed states, codify a stigma of their nuclear weapons publicly, legally, politically, and economically, make it more difficult for them to possess nuclear weapons, upgrade them, modernize them, whatever they want to do with them, and codify the rejection of nuclear weapons as an instrument of security. Most of the world has already rejected this, but it's sort of in statements here or agreements here that are regional. It's not codified in one legally binding agreement amongst the majority of countries in the world. And this is the idea that we put to the General Assembly this fall, and this is what states voted on. And it's one of these things in diplomacy that is really hard to calculate and anticipate. It took years for us to get to the point where they were going to have a meeting on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. It took more years after that to get them to agree that they needed a new treaty to deal with this problem. And it took them even longer to say the words banning nuclear weapons or prohibiting nuclear weapons. And all of a sudden, a tipping point happened in 2016 where we got over 120 countries saying that they wanted a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, even if the nuclear armed states wouldn't join in the negotiations. And at the General Assembly, we had 123 countries vote in favor of this. That was despite extremely active lobbying by the United States in particular, but also by France and by Russia. There was a lot of scaremongering going on, a lot of threatening going on. The United States even had their highest levels of diplomats come to the UN and counter-lobby against this resolution at the General Assembly. We had statements from almost all of the states possessing nuclear weapons condemning these negotiations, ridiculing states that were leading this initiative, became very personal and undiplomatic at the General Assembly this fall. It was actually quite shocking at some points. There were some off-the-record statements that really floored all of us that we weren't allowed to tweet about, which was too bad. But it basically the gloves came off and they lost. They lost anyway, despite all the fear-mongering. And the negotiations are going to begin this year. The first round is going to be in March, the last week of March. That's probably going to be mostly a place for states to come and say what they want to be in the treaty. After that, there will be a draft text developed, and that's what will be negotiated in June and July this year. We don't know if they'll finish in July. Right now, they're scheduled to finish on July 7th. It's possible they'll need more time, either this year or next year. We don't know. Doesn't really matter. The fact is they're negotiating the treaty. We do not anticipate that many of the nuclear armed states will come. China might come. They have said that they are in favor of prohibiting nuclear weapons. In the past, they've always said that the caveat is when the United States and Russia are ready to. But they haven't been oppositional towards it the way that the others have. India might also come, but they also have sort of a hypocritical position that they're in favor of the elimination of nuclear weapons, but they're going to keep them until everyone else is disarming as well. But they might come as well. But the rest of them probably not. And that's okay. We don't need them there. The other complicating factor to this, though, and the group of states that we see this treaty really affecting is countries that rely on U.S. nuclear weapons in their security doctrines. So this includes all the states in NATO, and it also includes Australia, South Korea, and Japan. Japan is under a lot of pressure on this treaty. It voted no on the resolution. It's been an extreme opposition to the negotiation of a treaty banning nuclear weapons. This is a big problem for it back home. It's the only country, of course, that suffered an atomic bombing in a time of war. It has a lot of atomic bomb survivors that are very active. Most people in Japan support the elimination of nuclear weapons. And yet the Japanese government, which at the moment is extremely conservative, is very supportive of U.S. foreign policy in general, and in particular the reliance on nuclear weapons in its security doctrine. We don't know if Japan's going to come to the negotiations, but we expect that if they do, it will mostly be to see if they can protect that ability to have nuclear weapons be part of their security doctrine and still be part of the prohibition to save face back home. So we're quite keen to shut that down and to make sure that's not possible for them. But that's going to be what a number of other countries, either that are with NATO or are part of this group, Australia, South Korea, That's going to be their approach to things as well. It doesn't look like too many of them will come. NATO states were specifically instructed by the U.S. Under Obama to boycott the negotiations. We expect that most of them, even though there's been a change of administration here, will still respect that direction from the United States. We do know that the Netherlands is going to come, so they are breaking rank, and they are going to come to New York and participate in the negotiations. I'm from Canada. There's been a huge amount of pressure on Prime Minister Trudeau to come. We don't know if Canada will join or not. They have very recently said no, but we just changed our foreign minister, so we're trying again with the new foreign minister to see if we can get a change before March. There's a few other countries in NATO that we think we might be able to peel off, but we don't know. And it doesn't matter if they don't come, because, as I've said, the point of this agreement isn't to change the weapons themselves. It isn't to take away the weapons themselves at this point. It's about pressure. It's about political, economic, social pressure. And we can do that by developing norms and rules for the rest of the world that do have an impact. So, in terms of what you all can do and where we need help, and what might be interesting, I would love to hear from you. I can tell you about a few things. So in terms of the actual negotiations themselves, it will be possible for civil society to attend. We don't know yet the parameters for that. There's going to be a meeting on February 16th, after which we'll know more about how we can be engaged in the actual negotiations. But it will be possible to register to get a UN pass to come into the UN and observe the proceedings at the very least. So that should be possible, and that information we'll send out as soon as it's ready from the UN. In terms of what's happening around New York, though, that's sort of where we need the most help. We need help raising local awareness about this in New York and also nationally. It's not something that people know about. There was a massive revolt at the General Assembly in October. It's the most fantastic thing that we've ever seen. It was shocking even to those of us that have been working on trying to get this treaty for the last 7 years. It surprised even us, and most people don't know about it. There was a little bit of media. The Guardian ran a big story. There was some wire stories about it, but most people don't know about it. Most media doesn't know about it. So anything that we can do to raise awareness of it, whether it's local papers, national papers, events, any meetings that you're having, church meetings or student meetings or anything. It's great to get the word out as much as possible. Around the June and July segment, we're going to be doing some big public events. On June 17th, it's a Saturday evening, we're going to do a big event at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. And that'll have some speakers, some musicians, some artists. So that should be good. And the following day, we're going to have a big march. And it's going to be a women's march to ban the bomb, much like the women's march that happened in Washington and the 600 sister marches that happen around the world. It's going to be women-led, inclusive of everybody. Alicia's helping to plan that on Peace Action's behalf and with other groups that have been interested in this. If you want to get involved in helping us organize, we have 1 million tasks for people to take on. It's really hard to organize these big public events, so we're looking for all help that we can get. But that'll take place. Probably we'll go from the UN to Central Park if we can get the permits. We'll go past Trump Towers. Maybe we'll wear some pink hats. And we'll end up with a rally in the park. So we're hoping to get lots and lots of people out for that, and we'll need your help with that as well, circulating that information. And there's going to be other opportunities, both around the March negotiations and June, July, for public demonstrations or events. We're really happy to hear from you on what's useful for you, what you need from ICANN or from WILP, what you think is a really good, hooks with the public right now. There's obviously a million things going wrong right now, and it's hard to focus on any one thing when, I mean, you look at the list daily and it sort of makes you want to take a nap, or worse. But I think this is a really important one, and we don't want it to be based on fear, but that is obviously a hook right now too for people thinking about things to be afraid of. But we don't want it to be a fear-based campaign. We want to celebrate the culture of both multilateralism and solidarity globally that we've seen coming out of what's happening here, but also around this nuclear weapons issue with 123 countries saying it doesn't matter if the most powerful states in the world don't want us to do this, we're going to do it anyway because it's going to help humanity. We want that to be the spirit of what we're trying to do. So messages of solidarity and hope and change and doing things even when the big powers don't want you to do it, I think are important messages as well, in addition to the fear and insanity that nuclear weapons bring to our lives all the time.